Professor Clark, who or what are the vulnerable in international society?
All human societies, even though they do not set out to do so, in fact create groups of vulnerability. They distribute vulnerability. They do that in various ways, how they manage the problems that confront international society. And in the areas that I've been looking at, in climate change, human health, human movement, there are various ways in which international society itself creates the vulnerable by how it sets about trying to manage these individual problems.
And how does international society affect the degree of harm to which people are exposed?
Again, all human societies have these effects. So if you take the example of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans in the United States, this was a case where the social topography of the city led to some groups of people being more exposed to harm than were others. And all I have attempted to do in this argument is to suggest that international society works in the same way, that it creates a global social topography. And the result of that is that some groups of people find themselves exposed to greater levels of harm than do some others.
And Professor Clark, could you explain how this particular concept plays out in the case of political violence?
Yes, this is a good example because international society has sought to regulate political violence for many centuries. There are some forms of political violence that it accepts, it calls that war, and there are other forms of political violence that it disapproves of, and it calls them things like insurgency, or it calls them terrorism and things like that. It has sought to distribute vulnerability in accordance with a concept of war as the only acceptable form of political violence, and it has done so by creating categories of combatants who are socially liable to harm and non-combatants who are not. The reality of violence doesn't always play out that way, but that is how it has tried to structure the regulation of this activity.